The first encounter, Emerge's Empire. The stars shimmered quietly in the deep vastness of space. The massive ship, the Horizon, cruised through the empty void, carrying its brave crew on a mission they didn't fully understand. Captain Drake sat at the helm, staring at the star-filled horizon, his mind heavy with questions. A strange signal had been intercepted, a transmission that wasn't supposed to exist. It was coming from a sector of space known as the Elder's Void, a place where few ventured. The crew was on high alert. Sarah, the ship's lead engineer, adjusted the ship's sensors, trying to make sense of the strange data. "Captain, the signal is clear," she reported, "but it's different. It's like nothing I've ever seen before." Drake leaned forward, narrowing his eyes. "What do you mean by different?" "It's not just a normal transmission, sir. It's coded, or rather, it's encrypted in a way that suggests it's from an ancient civilization, and it's coming from a point within the Elder's Void," Sarah replied, her voice tinged with unease. The Elder's Void was a place infamous for its dark history. Many ships had disappeared there over the centuries. Legends spoke of an empire long forgotten, a race of beings whose knowledge was vast, but whose downfall was even greater. Some said it was cursed, others believed it was a place that time itself had forgotten. "Are you sure this isn't a mistake?" Drake asked, trying to hide the concern in his voice. "Could the signal be a glitch?" Sarah hesitated. "I'm not sure, Captain. It's almost as if the signal is calling to us." The room grew silent. The crew could feel the weight of her words. The horizon was on the edge of unexplored space, where no one had dared to go in over 100 years. Yet here they were, receiving an invitation of sorts from that very same place. It didn't feel right. "Prepare the crew for a jump," Drake ordered, standing up and pacing. "We're going in. If this is a trap, we need to know. If it's a message, we'll figure it out." The tension was thick as the crew scrambled to prepare the ship. They had no idea what awaited them, but they all knew the risks. The Elder's Void wasn't a place where the faint of heart survived. It was a realm that had swallowed countless explorers, and yet the call to investigate was irresistible. As the ship moved closer to the void, strange things began to happen. The stars ahead seemed to dim, as if something massive was pulling at the light. The sensors flickered, struggling to maintain a clear reading. The crew could feel the ship being pulled in, slowly but surely, as if the void itself was alive, reaching out to claim them. "Captain, we're losing control of the systems," Sarah called out from her station. "Something's pulling us in. The engines can't break free. Brace for impact." Drake ordered. He could see the panic in the eyes of his crew, but he had no time to calm them. Their fate now lay in the hands of the unknown. The ship shuddered violently, and the lights flickered as a deep, rumbling noise echoed through the walls. The hum of the engines grew louder, but it wasn't coming from the horizon anymore. It was coming from somewhere else. A voice. A low, guttural sound that seemed to echo across the entire ship. "Captain, what is that?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. Drake's heart raced. He knew that sound. He had heard it in stories, tales whispered in hushed voices among explorers and scientists. It was a sound linked to the ancient empire that once ruled this region of space. They called it the Empire of the Lost, and its fall had been so great that even the universe seemed to want to forget it. The rumbling grew louder, and then, with a sudden jolt, the horizon was enveloped in darkness. The stars, the void, the ship, everything around them seemed to vanish as the world seemed to collapse in on itself. In the chaos, Drake's voice was the only thing that could be heard clearly. "Hold on. Keep your positions." But the power was already gone. The ship was no longer in control. It was drifting, pulled by an unseen force, straight into the heart of the Elder's Void. As the crew struggled to maintain their composure, Drake couldn't shake the feeling that they were no longer alone. For a moment, everything was silent. The hum of the ship had stopped, and the strange noise faded into the background. The crew felt as though they had crossed into another realm entirely. The space around them wasn't empty, but something was lurking just beyond the edges of their perception. Something ancient, something dangerous. "Where are we?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. Drake didn't answer. He didn't need to. They were in the grip of the unknown now, a place where ancient forces had once ruled, and where even the stars seemed to tremble in fear. They had entered the heart of the Empire of the Lost. And now, there was no turning back into the unknown. The ship, now drifting silently through the dark void, seemed to be on the edge of reality itself. Captain Drake stood at the bridge, staring out into the unknown. The stars that once filled the sky had all but disappeared. All that remained was an eerie, oppressive darkness, broken only by the faint glow of the ship's instruments. There was no sign of any celestial bodies, no distant suns or moons, just a vast emptiness that stretched on forever. "Captain, we've lost all external communication," Sarah reported from her station, her voice laced with uncertainty. "The signal, it's gone. All we have is static." Drake's grip tightened on the armrest of his seat. They were alone, completely isolated in a region of space where no one had been for centuries. The crew had expected some kind of danger, but this was worse than anything they had imagined. "Where exactly are we, Sarah?" Drake asked, trying to keep his voice calm despite the growing dread. I can't be sure, Captain. The sensors are acting up. Everything's scrambled. It's like we're in a region of space where normal laws don't apply." Sarah's voice wavered as she continued, "We should have never come here." Drake turned to her, his eyes hard. "We have no choice now. We're committed. Keep trying to get a fix on the coordinates. We need to know where we are, and if we can get out of here." But before Sarah could respond, the ship lurched suddenly, throwing everyone off balance. The lights flickered and dimmed as a strange hum filled the air, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the very walls of the ship. The crew scrambled to secure themselves, but Drake could see the fear beginning to grow in their eyes. "Report," Drake barked. "It's coming from all around us," Sarah replied, eyes wide. "We're not alone." The hum grew louder, almost deafening. Then, as quickly as it started, it stopped. An unsettling silence followed, the kind that pressed against the crew like a physical weight. No one spoke. Everyone waited, breathless, for something, anything, to happen. Then, out of the silence, a flash of light appeared. It was faint at first, almost like a distant star, but it grew brighter, rapidly expanding until it consumed the entire view outside the ship's windows. The crew gasped as they realized what they were seeing. Massive structures, buildings, monuments, and spires, emerged from the darkness, seemingly out of nowhere. "Is this a mirage?" Sarah whispered, awe and fear mixing in her voice. Drake's eyes widened. "No, this is real. We're seeing something no one was ever meant to see." The structures were unlike anything humanity had encountered before. They were massive, towering above the ship like ancient giants. The architecture was strange and alien, with sharp, jagged edges and surfaces that seemed to shimmer in the dark, reflecting the faint light of their ship. The sheer size of these structures was overwhelming. They were not simply ruins. They were a city, one that had stood the test of time, untouched by the centuries that had passed. "Do we land?" Sarah asked, her voice full of trepidation. "No," Drake replied firmly. "Not yet. We need more information before we make a decision. Let's get a closer look." The crew moved with caution as the ship slowly maneuvered toward the nearest structure. The eerie silence around them pressed in, as though the city itself was watching, waiting. Every passing moment felt like an eternity. As they neared the structure, the ship's sensors began to pick up strange readings, high energy levels, fluctuating gravitational fields, and magnetic anomalies that shouldn't have been possible. "These readings, they're off the charts, Captain," Sarah reported, her voice trembling. "I think we've found something," Drake muttered to himself. But as he looked out at the immense alien city, his heart began to race. There was something deeply unsettling about it. The city felt alive, but in a way that was unnatural, as if it had been waiting for them, calling them in. Then, just as they were about to pass through a massive archway into the heart of the city, the hum returned. This time, however, it was not just a sound. It was a force, a vibration that shook the entire ship. The crew could feel it in their bones, as though the very air around them was alive and pulsing. "Get us out of here," shouted one of the crew members, panic rising in their voice. But it was too late. The ship's controls froze, as if some external force had taken control. The crew's attempts to regain control were futile. The ship drifted forward, pulled inexorably toward the center of the city. "We have to go inside," Drake said, his voice steady despite the panic growing among the crew. "We don't have a choice now." With no other option, the ship moved forward, its path now directed by the unseen force. The massive city loomed ahead, its structures towering like ancient gods, waiting to reveal their secrets. And then, just as the ship crossed the threshold, the lights flickered and the hum reached a deafening crescendo. The horizon had entered the heart of the alien city. The descent into high hell. The ship hovered just inside the massive archway, its systems still frozen under the overwhelming force that seemed to control everything. No one spoke. The crew was paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of what they had discovered. It was as if time itself had stopped in this place, leaving them in a moment of suspended reality. Captain Drake stood at the helm, gripping the edge of his seat with white-knuckled hands. His gaze was locked on the darkened city around them. An alien metropolis older than any human civilization, filled with structures that seemed to stretch on endlessly. The walls of the buildings shimmered like polished obsidian, absorbing the dim light of their ship. There was no sound, no movement, except for the low hum that resonated deep within the ship. "Captain," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper, I think this place is alive. It's breathing." Drake's eyes narrowed. He had suspected it, but hearing it aloud made it feel even more real. There was something unnatural about this place, something that felt wrong. It was as if they had stepped into a different realm, one that existed outside the rules of time and space. "I agree," Drake replied, his voice steady but laced with tension. "But we're here now. We need to find out what happened here, what's been hiding in this place for all these centuries." The crew remained silent as the ship slowly moved forward, its movements guided by an invisible hand. The closer they got to the heart of the city, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The walls of the buildings loomed larger, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch over the ship like dark fingers. Every step forward felt like they were descending deeper into something far more dangerous. As they moved through the narrow streets of the city, the strange hum grew louder, echoing off the walls around them. The crew's eyes darted nervously from one building to the next, but there was no sign of life. No aliens, no inhabitants, just the oppressive silence that seemed to hang in the air. Suddenly, the ship shuddered again, and the crew braced themselves as a powerful wave of energy pulsed through the air. It was like an invisible hand had reached out and squeezed the ship. Sarah's fingers flew across her console, trying to regain control, but the systems were still unresponsive. "What's happening?" shouted one of the crew members, panic rising in their voice. "It's the city," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "It's reacting to us. It's not letting us leave." Drake's mind raced. He had heard of places like this. Ancient, forgotten ruins where the very environment could trap explorers, but he had never believed it. Until now. "Captain," Sarah called out urgently, "the energy readings, they're off the charts. Whatever is in the center of this city, it's powering everything. We need to go deeper if we're going to find the source." With no other option, Drake nodded. "Prepare to land. We'll move on foot from here." The ship's engines cut out, and the hum of the city seemed to intensify as they descended toward a large plaza in the center of the city. The plaza was enormous, stretching out in all directions, its surface covered in strange, glowing markings. As they landed, the crew stepped out, their boots clanking against the metal ground. Drake took a deep breath and surveyed their surroundings. The plaza was silent, but it felt like it was watching them. The markings on the ground seemed to pulse with a strange energy, and as they stepped closer, they realized they were not random patterns. They were symbols, ancient and unfamiliar, carved into the surface of the plaza. "What do you think they mean?" asked one of the crew members, eyes wide with curiosity. Sarah knelt down, studying the symbols carefully. "I don't know, but they look like a map to something. Maybe the core of this place." Drake's heart skipped a beat. If there was one thing he had learned in his years as a captain, it was that a map meant something important. And if this was a map to the heart of the city, to the power that controlled everything, then they were standing on the edge of something massive, something that could change everything. "All right," Drake said, his voice low and determined. "We move out. We follow the map." The crew gathered their equipment and began moving toward the center of the plaza, where the symbols seemed to converge in a giant spiral. The hum around them grew louder, the energy in the air thickening with every step. The deeper they went into the city, the more oppressive it became. It felt as though the city itself was pushing back against them, resisting their progress. They moved quickly, hearts pounding, the only sound their footsteps echoing off the walls. But then, just as they reached the center of the plaza, something changed. The ground beneath them trembled, and a deep, rumbling sound filled the air. It was as though the city itself was waking up, its long-dormant mechanism stirring. A giant door, hidden in plain sight within the center of the plaza, began to slowly slide open with a groan of metal. The crew froze in place, eyes wide with shock and fear. Behind the door lay a dark corridor, stretching out into the unknown. "Is this it?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible. "This is it," Drake replied, his voice steady. "We've come this far. There's no turning back now." With that, they stepped into the darkness, their footsteps echoing through the corridor as they descended into the heart of High Hell. The fight for survival. The door slid shut behind them with a deep, echoing thud, trapping the crew in total darkness. The air was thick and cold, the kind of cold that seemed to seep into their bones. The only light came from their flashlights, their beams cutting through the inky blackness as they moved cautiously forward. The walls of the corridor were smooth and made of the same shimmering material as the city's exterior. It felt almost alive, pulsing with a strange energy that hummed beneath the surface. Captain Drake led the way, his footsteps echoing in the quiet as his team followed. Each step they took seemed to bring them deeper into an unknown abyss. The silence was oppressive, and the only sound was the soft hiss of their breathing through their helmets. "Stay close," Drake ordered, his voice low and commanding. "We don't know what's down here, but I can feel it. We're not alone." Sarah, the lead engineer, kept her eyes on the readings from her handheld scanner. "Captain, there's an energy source ahead. It's massive. It's almost as if it's alive, just like the city. Whatever it is, we need to keep moving," Drake said, glancing over his shoulder. "We can't afford to waste time." The deeper they went into the corridor, the stronger the sensation of being watched grew. It was subtle at first, just a feeling that something was out of place. But soon, it became undeniable. The crew could hear faint noises, scraping sounds, skittering like something was moving just beyond the range of their flashlights. "Did you hear that?" one of the crew members whispered, eyes darting around. "It's nothing," Drake replied, though his voice betrayed a hint of uncertainty. "Keep moving." But the unease lingered. Every step felt heavier, as though the ship's gravity itself was being distorted by the presence of something unseen. And then, without warning, the walls around them shuddered. The lights in the corridor flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Before anyone could react, A loud, shrill screech echoed from the darkness ahead. The sound sent a chill down their spines, freezing them in place. In an instant, the silence was shattered as something massive shot out from the shadows. A creature, black as night, with glowing red eyes, lunged at them with a terrifying speed. "Get back!" Drake shouted, drawing his weapon. But it was too late. The creature was upon them, its massive claws raking through the air, narrowly missing the crew. The team scrambled to react, firing at the creature, but the blasts only seemed to anger it. It howled, its voice a horrifying mix of pain and rage. The air seemed to vibrate with its fury. "Fall back! Fall back!" Drake ordered, already moving toward the corridor's exit. The crew scrambled to retreat, but the creature was relentless. It chased after them, moving faster than anything they had ever seen. One of the crew members, a young engineer named Miller, stumbled and fell, his leg caught by the creature's claws. He screamed in agony as the beast dragged him further into the darkness. "No!" shouted Sarah, reaching out to help. But it was too late. The creature disappeared into the shadows with its victim, leaving only the echo of Miller's cries behind. "Keep moving," Drake yelled, pulling Sarah back as the crew continued to flee. "We have to make it out of here." They ran, the sound of their heavy footsteps and the creature's growls reverberating down the corridor. But the further they ran, the more the walls seemed to close in. The path ahead twisted and turned, disorienting them, making it harder to find their way back. Suddenly, the corridor opened up into a massive chamber. The team skidded to a halt, their breath ragged as they surveyed their surroundings. It was unlike anything they had seen before. The chamber was vast, its ceiling lost in darkness. In the center, a pulsing, glowing orb floated above a massive stone altar. The energy readings from Sarah's scanner were off the charts. "This is it," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "This is the core of the city. This is what's been controlling everything." Drake's eyes locked onto the orb. It hummed with a strange, malevolent energy. He could feel it in his bones. This was no ordinary power source. Whatever it was ancient, beyond anything humanity had ever encountered. It felt as though the very essence of the city was alive in that orb. "We need to destroy it," Drake said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "If we don't, this place will continue to trap us. It's the only way." But as they moved closer, the air grew heavier. The walls of the chamber began to shake. The ground trembled beneath their feet. The creature, along with more of its kind, emerged from the shadows, surrounding them. "We're not going to make it out of here," one of the crew members muttered, fear creeping into their voice. "We will," Drake said, determination in his eyes. "We have to. If we don't fight back now, we'll be trapped here forever." The crew readied their weapons, standing together in the center of the chamber, facing the monstrous creatures that closed in from every side. The air crackled with energy, and the pulse of the orb grew louder, stronger, as though it were feeding off their fear. "This is it," Drake said, looking around at his crew, who stood firm despite the terror rising within them. "We fight. We survive." With that, they charged into the fray, battling the creatures with everything they had. The chamber erupted into chaos as the crew fought for their lives, trying to make their way toward the core of the city and the glowing orb that held their only hope for escape. The truth revealed. The battle raged on in the massive chamber, the crew fighting for their survival against the relentless alien creatures. Their weapons flashed in the darkness, but it felt like they were fighting an impossible battle. Every time they struck down one of the creatures, more seemed to appear from the shadows, drawn to the chaos and the energy pulsing from the orb at the center of the room. Captain Drake swung his rifle, taking down another of the creatures as it lunged toward him. Sweat dripped down his forehead, his mind racing. They couldn't keep this up much longer. They were outnumbered, outmatched, and the creatures seemed endless. "Sarah," Drake shouted over the noise of the battle, "can you get to the core? We need to destroy it. Sarah, her face pale and her hands trembling, nodded. I'll try. Cover me. She pushed her way through the chaos, weaving between fallen crew members and alien bodies, heading for the pulsing orb. The creatures tried to stop her, but the team held their ground, covering her as best as they could. It was a desperate stand, each moment feeling like the last. Drake's eyes never left Sarah as she reached the altar, the orb glowing brighter as she approached. He could see her hands flying over the alien technology that surrounded the orb, trying to make sense of its complex structure. But time was running out. The creatures were closing in on her, and the orb seemed to be feeding off the fear, growing stronger with every passing second. Suddenly, Sarah's voice rang out, filled with panic. I can't shut it down. Drake's heart raced. What do you mean you can't? I don't know how it works. The system is ancient, but it's linked to something else. This isn't just a power core. This is a prison. It's holding something inside, and I think it's what's controlling the city. Drake's mind raced as he processed her words. A prison? But who or what was trapped here? And how did it relate to the creatures hunting them? Before he could ask more, the ground shook again. The chamber trembled violently, and the energy from the orb intensified. The creatures seemed to pause, sensing something was changing, something was coming. The air grew thick with a powerful, ominous presence. Then, the truth began to unfold. The orb's light flared brightly, nearly blinding them, as cracks began to form along its surface. The walls of the chamber trembled as if something massive was awakening deep inside the orb. The creatures backed away, almost as if they were afraid. The crew, now huddled together, could only watch in horror as the orb began to open. Everyone, get back, Drake shouted, but it was already too late. A deep, guttural roar filled the chamber, echoing through the walls. The orb shattered with a violent explosion of light, and from the center of it, a massive shadow emerged, an entity more terrifying than any of them could have imagined. It was an ancient being, trapped for eons, its form shifting and warping as if it could not fully exist in this dimension. Its eyes, glowing with an unnatural light, locked onto the crew. The room fell silent as the entity gazed at them, its form too large and too powerful to fully comprehend. It was made of darkness, energy, and raw, ancient power. A creature of nightmares, a being that had once ruled over the alien empire that now lay in ruins. The crew stood frozen in place, their weapons powerless against the entity. This was no simple alien creature. It was something far older, far more dangerous, an ancient godlike being that had been locked away in this prison for millennia. Who dares awaken me? The voice of the entity boomed, its tone deep and otherworldly. It was not just a voice. It seemed to penetrate their minds, vibrating in their very souls. Drake took a step forward, his voice steady despite the overwhelming fear that gripped him. We did. We came here to stop the creatures and escape, but now we see the truth. You're the one who controls this place. The entity seemed to regard them with a strange amusement, its eyes narrowing. You know nothing of what you have released. I am the last of the fallen, the true ruler of this dead empire. I was imprisoned here by my own people, and now you have freed me. But it is too late for you. The crew, still recovering from the shock, tried to hold their ground, but they knew they were no match for this creature. The energy in the room crackled, the air thick with an overwhelming sense of impending doom. Then why release us? Sarah demanded, her voice shaking. Why let us go this far if you wanted to kill us? The entity's voice rumbled again. I do not need to release you. You were drawn here. You came because you sought answers, and now you shall witness the fall of your kind as I rise again. You have done my bidding without even knowing it. The truth hit them like a ton of bricks. The creatures, the city, the rift, they had all been part of a plan, a long-forgotten scheme by this ancient being to free itself from its prison. And now, with the orb destroyed, it was free to reclaim its power. You "You were just using us," Drake said, his voice filled with anger. "We were nothing more than pawns in your game." The entity's laugh filled the room, a deep, terrifying sound that echoed for what seemed like an eternity. "You were never meant to survive. The moment you entered this place, your fate was sealed." Drake knew then that their only chance was to stop the creature before it could fully awaken. But how? They had no weapon strong enough, no technology that could contain such a powerful being. As the entity began to grow, its form expanding, a final thought crossed Drake's mind. The only way to stop it was to make a sacrifice. The final battle. The creature, now fully awakened, towered over the crew, its dark, shifting form crackling with ancient power. The chamber was alive with an oppressive energy that seemed to draw the very air from their lungs. Drake and his team stood frozen, their weapons useless against an entity so powerful that it seemed to bend the very fabric of reality. "You cannot stop me," the entity's voice thundered, vibrating through the walls. Its eyes, glowing with a terrifying light, locked onto them, sending chills down their spines. "Your kind has always been weak, and now you will be the last to fall." The crew stood in stunned silence for a moment, trying to comprehend the full scale of the threat before them. The ground beneath their feet trembled, as if the entire city was reacting to the entity's presence. They had uncovered the truth. The entity was no mere monster, but a godlike being, the last of a fallen empire, and it had been imprisoned here for centuries. Now, freed, it sought to reclaim its dominance over the galaxy. "We won't let you destroy everything," Sarah shouted, her voice shaking with a mix of fear and defiance. "We didn't come this far just to die." The entity's gaze shifted to her, and it smiled, though the expression was far from comforting. "You have no choice but to die. You are ants before me, nothing more." Drake's mind raced. Their weapons were useless, their technology powerless. There had to be another way. The orb, the core of the city, was the source of the entity's power. If they could destroy it, they might stand a chance. But how could they do that with nothing but their fists and a few scattered tools? "Listen to me," Drake said, his voice steady despite the terror creeping into his chest. "The core is the key. It's what's keeping the city alive. And it's what's feeding this thing. If we can destroy it, we can destroy him. It's our only shot." Sarah, her face pale but determined, nodded. "I'll find a way to disable the core. But we need time. We can't let that thing stop us." Without another word, Sarah sprinted toward the now destroyed orb's remains, her hands flying over the alien technology, searching for something, anything, that could help them disable the core's energy flow. Meanwhile, the creature watched them with amusement, its enormous form shifting in the dim light. "Pathetic," the entity muttered, its voice growing louder with each passing second. "You think you can stop me? You cannot even comprehend the power I possess." The air crackled with energy as the creature raised its hand, and a wave of dark energy surged toward them. The ground split beneath their feet as the force knocked them back. Drake barely managed to hold onto his weapon, feeling the shockwave course through his body. His crew was thrown in all directions, landing hard against the walls. "Move," Drake shouted, scrambling to his feet and helping Sarah up. "Keep fighting. We have to hold it off." But the creature was already charging toward them, its massive form closing the distance at an unnatural speed. The room shook with every step it took, and its eyes glowed brighter with each passing second, the dark energy surrounding it growing stronger. "We can't stop him like this," one of the crew members yelled, desperation in their voice. "We're going to die. We have to try," Drake shouted back. He turned to Sarah, his gaze hard. "Do it now, Sarah. We don't have much time." Sarah nodded, her hands trembling as she worked quickly to rewire the core's technology. Sparks flew from the machinery as she pulled at the wires, reprogramming what she could. But the core was powerful, more powerful than anything they had faced. She could feel its energy surging through her fingertips, threatening to overwhelm her. I can't do this alone. Sarah cried, panic rising in her voice. Drake turned to the rest of the crew. Everyone, we need to buy Sarah more time. We need to keep that thing distracted. Without hesitation, the crew rallied together, charging at the entity with whatever weapons they had left. They knew it was hopeless, but it was their only chance. They shot, they fought, they did everything they could to slow the creature down, but their efforts were futile. The creature swatted them aside like flies, its power overwhelming. But even as they fought, Drake knew they couldn't keep this up. The creature was too strong. They were running out of time. Then, a cry broke through the chaos. Sarah had found something. "I've got it," she screamed, her voice filled with relief. "I've disabled the core's power supply. It's losing energy." The creature froze, its glowing eyes narrowing. "No, you cannot. I am eternal." But it was too late. The orb began to flicker, its light growing dimmer with each passing second. The ground beneath them trembled as the city began to collapse. The energy that had powered the entity and the city was now failing. And with it, the creature's form began to warp and crack. "No, I will not be destroyed," the entity roared, its voice now filled with panic. Drake watched, his heart pounding as the city itself seemed to come alive with the death throes of the creature. The walls began to crack, the floor crumbling beneath their feet. The entire structure was collapsing as the power that had sustained it began to unravel. "Everyone, get out," Drake shouted, grabbing Sarah's arm and pulling her toward the exit. "Move." The crew scrambled to their feet, racing toward the entrance of the chamber as the city collapsed around them. The rumbling grew louder, the walls shaking with the final destruction of the entity's prison. The last of the alien creatures howled in terror as they were swallowed by the chaos. With one final, deafening explosion, the city fell silent. The rise of humanity. The destruction of the entity was not silent. The final explosion reverberated throughout the collapsing city, its ancient walls cracking and crumbling under the immense pressure. The ground beneath the crew's feet shook violently, and the air was filled with a deep, rumbling sound that seemed to come from every direction. The oppressive energy that had once hung over them now faded, replaced by a strange calm, like the silence after a storm. Captain Drake, breathless and covered in dust, grabbed Sarah's arm, pulling her toward the exit. The rest of the crew was already moving, running as fast as they could toward the narrow corridor they had entered from. Behind them, the city, the ancient empire that had once ruled an unknown corner of the galaxy, was collapsing into ruin, its foundations crumbling away with the destruction of the entity. "We need to move faster," Drake shouted over the noise of the crumbling city. "We're running out of time." The crew pushed forward, their hearts pounding in their chests. They could feel the heat from the collapsing walls on their backs, hear the rumble of the ground as the ancient structures fell apart around them. Every step they took felt like it could be their last. The exit seemed miles away, and the darkness ahead seemed to grow deeper with every passing second. As they rounded a corner, a sudden flash of light blinded them. The entrance to the ship was in sight, but the shockwave from the collapse had just hit. The ground beneath them cracked, and they were forced to leap across a widening fissure that had opened up in the ground. Drake grabbed Sarah's arm again, pulling her to safety just as the gap grew too wide for anyone to cross. They were close now, so close that they could almost taste the freedom of escape. But there was still one thing they had to face. The ship was just ahead, its sleek form standing as a beacon of hope in the midst of the chaos. The crew reached the hatch and immediately began to board, their faces etched with exhaustion, their bodies battered and bruised. As they climbed aboard, Drake looked back one last time at the ruins of the city. He knew they had faced death and come out victorious, but the cost had been high. Miller, the young engineer, had not made it. He had been taken by the creatures in the heart of the city, his fate sealed the moment the battle had begun. The others, though battered, were still alive. For now. "Captain, the systems are down," Sarah cried, her voice laced with panic. "We need to restore power to the engines if we're going to get out of here." Drake didn't hesitate. "Get to work, Sarah. We don't have much time." The last few crew members scrambled into the control room as Sarah raced to her station, quickly rerouting power to the engines. The ground beneath them shook again as the final collapse of the city began. They were moments away from being trapped forever if they didn't escape. "All systems are back online," Sarah called out. "We can go now. Take us out of here, now," Drake ordered, his voice filled with urgency. The engines roared to life as the ship slowly began to lift off the ground. The crew could feel the weight of the world lifting from their shoulders as they rose into the air. They watched through the windows as the last remnants of the city crumbled into nothingness below them. The sky above, once dark and oppressive, was now clear, free from the hold of the entity that had haunted them for so long. As they broke through the atmosphere, the crew let out a collective sigh of relief. They were free. They had survived. Drake walked to the observation window, staring out into the vast emptiness of space. His mind raced as he thought about everything they had just been through. The creature, the city, the ancient empire that had long since fallen. They had faced unimaginable odds, and yet they were still here. They had lived. "This is what we do," Drake muttered to himself, his voice quiet. "We survive." "Captain," Sarah said, her voice coming from behind him. "What do we do now?" Drake turned, a somber expression on his face. "Now, we return to Earth. We bring this story back. Humanity needs to know what we faced. They need to know that we're capable of things that no one thought possible." "But what about the rest of the universe?" Sarah asked. "What happens if there are more of these places out there? What if there are more creatures, more empires like this one?" Drake looked at her, his expression hardening. "Then we fight. We don't stop. We face whatever comes our way, and we rise again, just like we did today." The crew stood together, looking out at the endless stars. They had just been to the heart of darkness, and now they were coming home. They had proved, without a doubt, that no force in the galaxy could break the human spirit. They had survived. They had triumphed. And no matter what came next, they knew one thing for sure: humanity would rise to meet it. As the ship sailed through the void, heading toward the distant blue planet they called home, Drake felt a deep sense of pride. They had faced impossible odds and won. The universe was vast, filled with unknowns, but the one thing that was certain was that humanity was strong, resilient, and unbreakable. And that was a force no darkness could ever overcome.